everyone. We are welcome, everybody. We are excited to be celebrating our annual. I guess we could say annual at this point. Juneteenth Learning Lab series. Last year was the first year that we had an opportunity to have a spirited conversation about all things with respect to the Black agenda. And so this year we plan to have another series of events that we hope will be informative, enlightening, and entertaining. I would like to, of course, acknowledge that we work our annual Juneteenth event in conjunction with Athenia Rodney, who is the CEO and founder of Juneteenth New York. We have an informative evening for you this evening. We will be joined by the sponsor of the MRTA here in New York. Of course, none other than our very own Assemblywoman, Majority Leader, Crystal People Stokes. And of course, some other folk who, of course, I'm sure look up to her with respect to this legislation. We have representatives from the Drug Policy Alliance, the Brooklyn Defender Services, the Immigration, the Immigrant Defense Fund, and Women Grow, which is a phenomenal organization of women led cannabis related businesses. This issue is very close to my heart because, of course, it severely impacts my district and the people that I represent. The marijuana convictions have ravished our community, and I was so proud to be a co sponsor on the legislation. New York is a leader among states when it comes to legislation, and passing MRTA this year really continues to set the stage. Tonight, we are joined by our leader among leaders. She has championed this bill. She is a champion in the New York State legislature, and quite frankly, she is the first Black woman to be the majority leader since it's the inception of the New York State legislature in September of 1777. And so I believe that while we are celebrating Juneteenth, that it's only befitting to recognize that all of those amazing individuals who we are celebrating today in Galveston, Texas, they in their not even in their wildest dream would they have thought of the fact that we would have a Crystal People Stokes. And so I'm sure that they are continuing in their rejoicing by rejoicing in this moment as well. And so please allow me to now introduce to you someone who has been leading the way on this issue, our very own Majority Leader, Crystal People Stokes.
Hi, thank you so much. What an exciting time to celebrate our history and our culture and to not be embarrassed by it because it is our history and our culture and it strengthens us. So I want to say thank you to my good friend and colleague, Assemblymember Latrice Walker, and all of the folks from DPA as well as the Smart Coalition folks that are on who help push the advocacy in our communities on this issue. It is an extremely important issue. And quite honestly, it's a great time to be celebrating it. We celebrated it during the passage of it, but for us to be celebrating it now during while we celebrate Juneteenth is just a phenomenal thought process. Um, I am a descendant of the people who made it through the Middle Passage, and they're making it through the Middle Passage and what they did throughout slavery and Jim Crow and segregation and not being able to vote and all of those horrible things that we've experienced as Black people in this country makes me very proud to be in a position for after 200 and some 40-odd years that I can be selected by Speaker Carl Hastie, who is a phenomenal leader in his own right, to be the majority leader. So I am honored. I am also extremely honored to have carried the load in the assembly, in the legislature, and across the state with my colleague Liz Kruger in the Senate on MARTA. It's very important legislation. It not only speaks to legalizing a product, but it speaks more importantly to the decriminalization of our people. And this product marijuana has been used more than anything to criminalize our people and destroy our families and, quite honestly, destroy our communities. And so the tenet of this legislation calls for social equity and it calls for economic equity. By the way, it is the first time in my life that I ever debated anything for 7 hours, but I didn't do that debate alone. In fact, my good friend and colleague, Latrice Walker, assisted me during the course of this 7 hour debate in dealing just with the legal aspects of the decriminalization part of it, the expungement pieces of it, the tenor of the law in terms of stopping folks from being able to smell marijuana and pull us over and arresting, stopping and frisking. All that's over now because of the work that has gone into MRTA. And I would be remiss if I try to take credit solely on my own, because there's no way you do anything like this on your own. You do this with a lot of people behind you, a lot of people in front of you, and for sure the speaker was in front of me at all times, and the caucus, the Black Puerto Rican Legislative Asian Caucus, was always there on this issue. And it's because the caucus stood so strong and has such really strong numbers that we don't have to tolerate the legalization of marijuana without it having the equity principles as a priority in its intention. And that is to make sure that there's a 50% goal as it relates to the establishment of businesses uh, throughout the growth of this industry. And there's also a statute requirement that 40% of the revenue that the state will eventually earn through the tax revenue it collects must be invested in the lives, the communities, and the families of the people who have been destroyed as a result of mass incarceration. And they are many. And they live in and around everywhere in New York State, not just in New York City and not just in Buffalo. This law is going to help restore a lot of what has been taken from them, a lot of what has been taken from their children by their parents being incarcerated, a lot of what's been taken from their parents by not having their children with them and raising multiple generations of grandchildren, not being able to invest in their homes because they had to invest in their children. We got to look back and figure out how to reinvest in the lives of those people. And so for me, because I know marijuana is already a multiple $billion industry in the state of New York, it's not my priority to help people make more money. It's my priority to make people get access to making money so they can begin to build generational wealth. And it's my priority to reinvest in the lives of folks who have systematically been destroyed over multiple decades. And so the fact that this legislation has moved forward is very exciting to me. I was hoping before the end of the session that the governor would have made his recommendations for the chair of the Office of Cannabis Management Board and the executive director of the Office of Cannabis Management, so that the Senate could have gone through its approval process and folks would be in place so we can begin to work on putting together the regulation and the licensing process that so many of my constituents, and I'm sure yours as well, Member Walker, are interested in getting access to. We can't even get to that point until the Senate has approved the governor's recommendations, and the Senate can't approve it until the governor makes them. So I'm hopeful that happens before the end of June. I think it's as critically important to make sure we have the right persons in those positions, but I also think that, it's critically important that we keep the advocacy going. These things, again, did not happen in a vacuum. It did not just happen with the legislature, although many of us were in the lead on it. It was the people behind us that made this happen. And so we're going to need the people to stay behind us to make sure that it gets implemented in a proper fashion. And I look forward to working with you all to continue to make sure that happens. And so thank you again for having me here. I want to always be grateful for any opportunity to celebrate Juneteenth. As a Buffalonian, a lifelong Buffalonian, I've been celebrating Juneteenth this time of year for the last 46 years. And so it does my heart a lot of joy to see that America now understands the value in celebrating Juneteenth and understanding the history of Black people in this country, what we have contributed, and how we built this country. America is not America if it's not for Black people and what we've invested here. We deserve a return on our investment, and this is one piece of the way that we can get it through MARTA. And so, again, it's my pleasure to have worked on it, and I look forward to its full implementation as intended. Happy to answer any questions that you all may have. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Majority Leader.
How are you? Good to see you.
So good to see you too. I was just appreciating your words and, remembering the absolutely epic battle that it took to pass this legislation and your leadership down to, as you were describing, those final hours upon hours that you stood and that you defended this bill from every single angle possible. You explained frontwards, backwards, sideways, forward, every single iteration of the reasons why the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act is so crucial for New Yorkers. And the fact that you had Assemblywoman Walker there as well,
Yes.
back you up, the two of you really bringing this over the finish line and being abundantly clear and intentional about why the legislation was crafted the way that you did it, and really explaining that to folks. And I just offer so much gratitude, so much appreciation to you for your leadership within this fight over years and years that it took. Um, I speak on behalf of all New Yorkers here and saying a tremendous thank you
You're
for
very,
everything that you have done, Majority Leader.
my pleasure.
Um, okay, I guess I'm being told in the chat that I'm supposed to now kick off the next section, so I guess I'm going to do that. But with I think just really dovetailing on the words of the Majority Leader in speaking about why this bill was so needed when it came and why New Yorkers were not willing to settle for anything less. In terms of the advocacy that the Majority Leader spoke about, we were also very clear, along with Majority Leader, along with the caucus, along with other members who for years had been championing the MRTA before it was the popular issue, before it was, all across the state, saying that this is what we needed in New York, that we demand marijuana justice. That was ringing out. We absolutely knew that this had to get over the finish line. And again, just offering a huge there just are no words, even Majority Leader, for the leadership and for the intention that you showed. So we thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much for being on today. And I know you have a packed schedule, so we'll definitely understand if you need to jump, but we just deeply and tremendously appreciate you.
Well, you are very, very welcome, and I will stay on and listen for as long as I possibly can. I cannot get enough of this topic because, as you know, it's a great thing to pass the legislation, but it's even more important to manage its implementation, and so that it gets managed in a way that we intended it for it to get managed. I assure you, I'll be around to make sure that happens.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And as you were saying, right now we're at this crucial phase where the bill has been passed through. And let's be abundantly clear that the reason for prohibition in New York in the first place had nothing to do with the science around the plant, had nothing to do with any of the pharmacology, had everything to do with wanting to completely be able to use it as an excuse for control, for maintaining segregation, for being able to target and attack communities all across New York State, from Brooklyn to Buffalo to Rochester and everywhere in between. So we can be now also as comprehensive and as clear in repairing those harms that have been done. And I really, again, want to offer a lot of gratitude to you, Majority Leader, and to Senator Krueger, because the way that the MRTA was crafted was not just looking forward, and it did so very wisely in terms of how it set up the framework for what we'll have in terms of the social equity provisions, what we'll have in terms of community reinvestment with the tax revenue that comes back in, the support for public schools across New York as tax revenue starts to come in as well. But also it was very, very intentional about looking back at the harm that's been done for decades across New York State. The fact that we know that the areas that had the highest marijuana arrest rates also have had some of the largest economic and social vulnerability measures, have also had some of the highest impacts from COVID all across New York State. So as we're talking about recovering, it's very clear that cannabis can be a part of that, and we need to be extremely intentional about recovering from the marijuana arrest crusade. And so we have a great slate of other speakers that are going to be able to delve in to real detail across all of the different ways that the MRTA was really laser focused on making sure that the repair can be just as extensive as the harm that was done. And in fact, even more so. So I want to bring in the next speaker right now. I don't want to preempt them by going through everything, but there's a lot to chop up. So I want to be able to bring in here Jackie from Brooklyn Defender Services, who will be able to talk through a lot of the automatic expungement components and some of the other criminal legal system ways that the MRTA was really thoughtful about how it was going to address a lot of the problems that were caused by the marijuana arrest crusade. So Jackie, I'll kick it over to you now.
Hi, how are you, Melissa? It's good to see you. I know that we have spent many months on many calls, and then after the amazing success of this legislation passing, we haven't seen each other in several weeks, so it's great to see you. I want to thank Assemblymember Walker for inviting us to speak today. Also, I want to thank the Majority Leader. I echo Melissa's sentiments and how amazing that fight was, and to watch it unfold through the debate was just incredible. All of the support that you gave to this issue. And I also just want to say, I guess, a shout out to the Start Smart Coalition and all of the organizations that came together to work on this issue. So as Melissa said, my name is Jacqueline Gazdigian. I am a senior policy counsel with Brooklyn Defender Services. For those who don't know, our organization provides a multidisciplinary and client-centered defense practice. We represent clients in criminal court, family court, immigration, and civil legal matters, and we represent and advocate approximately 30,000 indigent Brooklyn residents every year. I just want to start by saying that I believe, and I know that many in the public defense community believes, that the MRTA will have a substantial impact on the criminal legal system. And while decriminalization of marijuana in 2019 was definitely an important step, marijuana legalization through the MRTA will go a long way towards mitigating racially biased policing and reinvesting in the communities that were hardest hit by marijuana criminalization and the war on drugs. And I know you heard both the Majority Leader and Melissa discuss this reinvestment in these communities, and we believe that is one of the significant pieces of the MRTA. But even after the decriminalization attempt in 2019, police officers were using the odor of marijuana to continue to stop and harass individuals in communities of color. Despite the fact that the usage of marijuana is virtually the same in white communities, Black and brown communities continue to see a disproportionate amount of police contact for marijuana usage and marijuana odor. And one of the most important things that the MRTA does is that it explicitly prevents police officers from using that odor of marijuana as the sole basis to stop and question and detain individuals. Not only is possession of marijuana by adults 21 and over now legal, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of what's legal and what's not now, the MRTA decriminalizes possession for those under the age of 21 by making it a civil violation with a $50 fine and some drug education. And this is also going to have an important impact on the criminal legal system because it will prevent young people in our communities from becoming involved with the criminal justice process simply for marijuana use. And we have seen many young people wrapped up in this perpetual cycle of court dates and other obligations solely for possessing marijuana. We are hopeful that the MRTA will help minimize unnecessary police contact and court involvement for many New Yorkers that choose to responsibly and legally use and possess marijuana. I wanted to go through a little bit. I know we're gonna have questions at the end, and I will be here for any questions and happy to answer them. But just a little bit about what's legal now. Possession of marijuana is legal now. Possession of 3 ounces or less of cannabis and 24 grams or less of concentrated cannabis in a public place. And that was effective immediately. And I think that's important for people to know that possession component is effective immediately. And also, possession of up to 5 pounds of cannabis in your residence will be legal after the Office of Cannabis Management creates guidelines for home grow. Additionally, as far as sale is concerned, obviously sale will be legal when you have a license, and if you apply and obtain a license to sell, that will be legal. But a person who is 21 or over may give lawful amounts of cannabis to other people who are 21 or over, so long as no compensation is exchanged. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about how during some of the debates there was some comparison of this sharing, similar to somebody coming over to your house and bringing a bottle of wine or bringing a bottle of liquor. This is intended to be something that is legal and amongst adults, can be used responsibly and can be shared with other adults responsibly. And so that would be legal. As far as smoking marijuana is concerned, it's permitted almost anywhere that cigarette smoking is allowed, including on sidewalks, on front stoops, and on other public places. And I think it's important for folks to know this, so that, you know, if they are being approached by a police officer, that they should know that this is legal and they are allowed to do this. So switching a little bit to what's not legal, this was definitely debated quite a bit under the when the law was being passed, but driving under the influence of cannabis or cannabis combined with alcohol is not legal. You cannot be driving under the influence of cannabis. You cannot smoke cannabis while driving. You can't sell cannabis for compensation without a license. Smoking cannabis in New York City parks where no smoking signs are posted, or in the transit system. Smoking cannabis where cigarette smoking is prohibited, such as bars or restaurants or childcare centers within 100 feet of a school, places of employment, NYCHA property, and indoor arenas. And I want to just briefly talk a little bit about NYCHA property, because NYCHA is the largest housing provider in New York City, and their regulations still allow them to terminate tenancies and deny admission, as well as permanently exclude family members based on marijuana-related arrests and pre-MRTA convictions. And I just wanted folks to know that our organization, as well as other organizations in the community, are working on trying to remedy this issue. And lastly, individuals who are under 21, as I mentioned earlier, are not permitted to possess cannabis even in small quantities. But again, the idea is that this is to be decriminalized with a civil penalty and education about substance use and marijuana use, as opposed to incarcerating our young people. And with that, I am going to pass this to Neela, who's with our office. She's going to talk about the impact of the MRTA and the family regulation system.
Good evening. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to Assembly Member Walker for having us here tonight, and Majority Leader for your tremendous efforts to advance this important legislation. My name is Natarajan, and I'm a supervising attorney and policy counsel in the family defense practice at Brooklyn Defender Services. As advocates for parents and families facing allegations of abuse and neglect from the child welfare system, or what we like to call the family regulation system or family policing system, daily we bear witness to the ways in which marijuana use has historically been used to surveil families, harass families, separate families, and keep Black and Brown families separated. Just as Majority Leader stated, there are key provisions of the MRTA that we hope and believe will change this culture. Vitally, the MRTA created the new cannabis law, and under this law, no person can be denied custody of or visitation or parenting time with a child solely for the legal use of marijuana, unless there's separate evidence that a child has been harmed or is at risk of harm due to someone's marijuana use. Importantly, this new law dictates that this custody, visitation, parenting time determination, it can't be made solely based on whether, when, and how often someone uses cannabis without that separate evidence of harm. And that's so important because we have experienced for decades Child Protective Services, the family regulation system, keeping families separated, harassing families because of their marijuana use. Beyond the actual change in the law that I just mentioned, we also are going to keep fighting because this legislation is a statement from our legislature. It's a statement from our culture and our society that adults can use marijuana responsibly. And we're going to keep fighting to ensure that the family regulation system moves beyond what we know is a racist stigma around parental marijuana use and stops using marijuana use as a tool against parents and families. I, too, like Jackie, will be here at the end of our presentation to answer any further questions. And I look forward to that later today. With that, I believe I'm going to be passing the mic to Marie.
Hi, thanks, Neela.
No problem.
My name is Marie Mark. I'm from the Immigrant Defense Project. Thank you, Assemblymember Walker, for holding this event, for all of the work that you did. And again, to the Majority Leader, we are so thankful for your tireless efforts on behalf of New Yorkers. The Immigrant Defense Project works at the intersection of immigration and criminal law, and we work to make sure that both the immigration and criminal systems are reformed to be fairer for immigrants who have contacts with the criminal legal system. And, you know, as the Majority Leader said, the prohibition of marijuana has been used for years and years and years to destroy our communities, to break up our families. And for immigrants, that was even more true. Immigrants were facing a double punishment for just the fact of having a marijuana conviction, regardless of how small it was. We were seeing that DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, which regulates immigration into the United States, would use small marijuana convictions as the basis for deportation, to justify immigration detention and to deny people immigration benefits. And, you know, I think it was Jackie who talked a little bit about how one of the things that we're thinking about with this law is, when are we bringing young people into the criminal legal system, right? And we saw that even just an arrest would trigger immigration enforcement against young people based on marijuana offenses. And so one of the things that is, for me, extremely exciting about the MRTA is what it did for people who have already been convicted of marijuana offenses. And the big thing that it did for everyone automatically is to expunge convictions for the general population. Everybody did that. Everyone got that. It was automatic. You know, what we've heard is that it's already been implemented. And so you already today, if you are getting fingerprints done, should not be seeing some of those old convictions coming up on rap sheets. So that means that they can't be used against you for employment. It shouldn't be used against you for licensing. And people can really feel let go of the horrible consequences that come from having a conviction. But for immigrants, the calculus is a little bit different, right? Because the federal law continues to criminalize marijuana activity. And so for immigrants, the MRTA created a special means of erasing convictions that can be recognized by immigration law. The expungement alone, just for immigrants, is not necessarily going to block all of those negative immigration consequences that I talked about. So there is a system now where immigrants can go into the court and they can petition on their cases individually in front of a judge to get them erased in a way that will be effective for immigration. For people who are thinking about, what does that mean for me? I'm not a US citizen and I'm worried about this old immigration conviction. You know, we really recommend that you speak with a trusted attorney to make sure that this process is done carefully and correctly, because, you know, this is, in some cases, will determine your ability to remain in the US, will determine your ability to get some kind of immigration status like residency or get citizenship even. And so we really recommend that people speak with a trusted immigration attorney who can talk you through what is the system of going back into your court case, what are the risks, what are the benefits, and what will it mean for you when you go in front of an immigration agent sometime in the future. That's specifically for immigrants. You know, for everyone else, including immigrants, the convictions are expunged, and so they will not come up on your rap sheet. One of the provisions in the bill, and this started in 2019 with the decriminalization and was expanded with the MRTA, allows people to destroy their records. And most of the attorneys that I've spoken with really suggest that people think very carefully and get a lot of advice before asking to destroy their records, because once the records are destroyed, it's sometimes hard to figure out how you can prove what actually happened, right? How can I prove that I should be able to vacate my conviction in a way that is effective for immigration? How can I prove that actually this was a low-level conviction and has now been expunged? So we really do recommend that people talk with someone before they think about destroying those records, and that immigrants in particular talk with someone about how they can use this wonderful bill to erase their convictions in a way that means that they won't have immigration issues related to those convictions in the future. And so I will also be here for any questions. I'm happy to talk about that. And I'm going to ask, I think our next speaker is Tanya Osborne from Women Grow, to come in and talk more about what I'm sure everybody is interested in, which is around some of the licensing and business provisions.
Hey, thank you, Maria. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Assemblywoman Walker and Majority Leader, for being here as well. It is an honor to speak in front of everyone today. So my name again is Tanya Osborne. I'm the Director of Events and Community Outreach for Women Grow. If you don't know Women Grow, we are a national organization that encourages women to really find their place in the cannabis industry. We represent a community of women that are from entrepreneurs, business leaders, and advocates and the like. We were really fortunate to work with the Start Smart Coalition and Drug Policy Alliance to help fight for legalization, and we're so happy to be where we are. And as an organization, I really am excited to talk about entrepreneurship and how this all works out or will plan out for us in the future. So I'm not able to share a screen, but I definitely wanted to cover some info. As far as we go, there's equity in this bill, which is what that means is there will be allotted licenses for folks that may not have the resources to get one. So 40% of the actually 50% will be social equity licenses, which means there will be opportunities for women and small business owners to participate in the space. What also is going to happen is community reinvestment, which I think is really exciting because I am a Bronx native and have seen a lot of the policing of cannabis in our communities. So there's a lot of harm that has come to those communities, and the revenue that is going to be generated from cannabis sales, 40% of which will be going back into those communities. We'll also have money going to public schools for education. I'm a parent of a 14-year-old boy, and there needs to be a lot of education. And 20% of the monies will be going for drug treatment, which is very exciting. The law will create an incubator program that will help people enter the space who don't have the business acumen to run a potentially $1 million business. So that is really exciting that resources will be put into the community to be able to put those things in place. So we're really excited about that. We already talked about home cultivation, and we're excited because that's going to be one of the businesses that will be able to be grown as nursery. We're going to talk about the different types of businesses, but basically we can start looking for that. What I want everyone to know realistically right now is we don't have regulations. So I want everyone to be really mindful about if you want to get into this space, I don't want anyone to get taken advantage of. So please make sure that you work with an attorney, start building your team, creating your resources right now, get your business up to where you can present it for financing and capital, because that's going to be a really big part of building these businesses. I'm going to get to the different types of businesses that we'll be able to apply for shortly. But the types of licenses that are going to be available will be marijuana production licenses, processor licenses, delivery licenses, which I think will definitely fall under the social equity part as well. We will have on-site consumption lounge, because remember, as one of our guests said, I think it was Jackie, said that NYCHA does not allow consumption in their housing. So people will need places to consume. If you're a medical patient and can't consume at home, where will you consume? A big license will be an on-site consumption license. We'll have a micro business license. Think of like a micro brewery. It'll be in that vein. A retail, dispensary licenses, distributors, testing. We actually want tested products. So someone who does that type of testing. Nursery, which is what I spoke of, if you're a grower. Retailer. So there's so many different opportunities to enter the space. There's also cooperatives, which we didn't get down to yet. There's going to be many opportunities. So I wanted to just encourage people to work with an attorney that knows what they're doing and understands cannabis. Follow organizations like Women Grow. There's so many organizations that give information. And a lot of this information is free. Follow the Office of Cannabis Management as they start to put those staffs in place. Then you'll know, you'll get alerts. Just try to be the most educated consumer and future entrepreneur that you can. There are some other things that are going to happen. I entered cannabis from the medical perspective and became an entrepreneur in cannabis. So that does happen. And so there's going to be some changes in the medical program. Right now, the only place to access cannabis is if you are a medical patient. So that's a whole other conversation, but I just wanted to focus on that. If you are a person, you can find that information. I'm also a caregiver here in New York State. Please go to the Department of Health and get all that information. And then what else did I want to talk about? There was one other thing that I wanted to cover, and then I think we're going to be opening up for Q&A. A lot of times when people come to me to ask me, I want to get into cannabis, what should I do? I usually ask them, what do they do now? There's a thing called plant touching business and non-plant touching businesses. Obviously, it means what it is. One, you are physically touching the plant, and one, you are not. I work for Women Grow, but also am a community leader. We have a brand called the Canadiva. That is a non-plant touching entity. We do events, we do education. All of that I've done without a license. I don't need a license to do that. We call that ancillary businesses. So if someone is working in, let's say, accounting, we're going to need cannabis accountants. You do taxes, 280E, just Google it. I have a good friend who wants to get in the industry. He does HVAC. Of course, we're going to need that, because if people are going to be consuming and there's grow houses, they need to be able to, okay, cool. They're going to need to be able to have that service. A few other things: gardening, greenhouse, manufacturing, advertising, analytics, photography, e-commerce, website design, videography, banking service, accounting service we talked about. If you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, you can become a recommending physician. If you're an NP, you can also do the same. A lot of health coaches are coming into cannabis now because people want to understand the medicine of cannabis. Cannabis is medicine. So those are the different ways to enter the space. I'm really excited about what's to come. Feel free to follow us at Women Grow, and we'll always answer any of your questions. I'm actually going to bring Melissa back up to give us a little bit of close us out. We're waiting for Melissa. And if you want to find me, I am at the Canadiva or so if anyone has any questions, you can definitely hit us up. I am waiting. We have some little technical difficulties. Let's see if there's anything else that I got for you. What else do I have for you? Are you excited about home grow? I'm excited about home grow. I think it's going to be a huge opportunity for people to grow their own medicine, and I'm really looking forward to that as well. I'm looking forward to the incubator programs. Honestly, to be able to help someone get from seed to scale in their business is really going to be exciting. There's going to be resources available to work with some of the current operators in this space, and that is also going to be incredibly exciting. We're waiting for Melissa to come back up. I feel like I need to do a little dance for you here, but I don't know what to do or what to say to you. So if you are in New York City this weekend, our organization, the Canadiva, is doing a Pride event at Cafe Canal. You should come by and say hello. We would love to have you. We're going to have a show. We're going to have a DJ, and it's going to be fantastic. So again, follow us at the Canadiva for more information. We're actually going live here. I think there's a little bit of a situation. Let's see what else we have for you. I'm in the show and I'm waiting. I know we're live somewhere. Let's see if there's any comments. No, I can't see the comments. I know poor Nadine is having technical difficulties. Okay, so keep going. So let me keep going. I'm a parent of a 14-year-old child. And one of the things that I think is going to be an ancillary business that is going to be incredibly exciting is education. As a majority leader was speaking about during the debate for the moving forward of this bill, there's so much misinformation about cannabis as medicine and about an adult use program. And I think that developing programs to educate not only children, I have a middle schooler, soon to be a high schooler, is going to be so important for people. I know that a funny story quickly, my son was hearing a conversation of his peers and the conversation of weed popped up, and he came to ask me what if weed and cannabis were the same thing, because it's not something that we use in our home. And to which I, obviously explained, and it's just going to be so important to educate educators, teachers. A lot of them just don't know. School administrators, a lot of them don't know. Safety professionals in the schools, a lot of them don't know. And sometimes the first thing that they do is they call the police. And again, misinformation, they just don't know. And so we really want to create a lot of education for kids. I always say if a 3-year-old can learn Mandarin, they can understand cannabis. My son is very knowledgeable about THC and CBD and that the science says that the brain is not fully developed until it's 21 years old, and he has no interest in cannabis. But if he does, I feel very comfortable that he will come to me and talk to me about it. And because we've had open conversations, he's asked me questions. I've involved him in events. We have Melissa's mentioning, I took him to a rally because there was a suit against Jeff Sessions to help a child access their medicine. They had to leave one state to go to a legal state to get their medication. They were an epilepsy patient. So I took my son with me and we marched for her to make sure that happened. Yay, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. I felt like I was like,
No worries. You're filling in all the different angles of this. That was fantastic. Thank you, Tanya, for keeping us going.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Definitely, there was some technical difficulties. Again, so much gratitude to you, Tanya. It shows the tremendous depth.
I hope they edit that part out where I was just like,
no, definitely not. You have so much knowledge on this issue, and I think that was fantastic. Actually, you got to talk through so many different aspects of your own reality of working as a small business owner within this space, of being a patient advocate in terms of the medical program, and also being a parent and what that means. And that's true of so many people across New York. We don't live single issue lives, nor do we engage with cannabis just on a single level. And in fact, even for those who don't necessarily know about it consciously, prohibition and the marijuana arrest crusade and the ways in which cannabis has really been the focal point of so much enforcement cuts across a lot of different aspects of people's lives, whether they're fully aware of it or not. You know, people are violated on parole or probation in the past just because of a positive THC test, and that won't be able to happen anymore under the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. There are clear protections for people to not be sent back up just because of a THC screen. Similarly, people won't be able to be denied a job that they're qualified for simply because of a marijuana drug test anymore. We passed that through in New York City in 2019. Rochester also moved through similar legislation at the city level, and now it's state law that, barring certain certain safety considerations, or if people work for a federal position, also bear in mind, because of federal issues and that we still have to take care of, federal prohibition, y'all still have to be careful. But in terms of regular jobs in New York, you cannot be blocked out from getting a job that you're otherwise qualified for just because of a marijuana drug test anymore. And also, we know that those protections for parents that Nila was talking about are absolutely vital. We know that there is also, I want to raise it again for folks, for people who have had contact with the family regulation system in the past. We also want to be very clear that they're similar to the automatic expungement part that we talked about for people who have had criminal legal cases. There's actually a process for people who've been put on the statewide central registry because of cannabis, where there was no harm, there was no neglect for the child, to be able to get that actually sealed on the statewide central registry, which is really important. And then emphasizing again the automatic expungement piece, the fact that this is free, nobody has to pay for it, nobody has to go back through the court system. If you're part of the general population, you get this relief automatically for free, and it's already moving along. For folks who have immigration considerations, as Marie was talking about, really, really important to speak with somebody directly who has knowledge. I would highly recommend Immigrant Defense Project. That's where Marie works. Absolutely incredible folks over there. Brooklyn Defender Services also has an immigration defense practice. Really, any public defender office, definitely make sure that you're speaking with them. And if you need to speak to some folks to clear your name off of the statewide central registry, you can also reach out to a lot of the public defender practices. They have family defense units that are also extremely knowledgeable in this area. So just emphasizing for folks again, the comprehensive nature of everything that's in this bill. After fighting for so many years, we knew that it couldn't just be, and the majority leader and Senator Krueger, who are the sponsors of this legislation, members of the caucus, like Assemblymember Walker, who are champions of this bill, knew that it was not enough to just talk about legalization any which way, but demanded marijuana justice for New Yorkers and passed through a bill that was very clear about being expansive in all of these areas and setting forth, we know that there's restitution across many different channels that was needed for the marijuana arrest crusade in New York. There was what we were talking about here with the expungement, with actually redress for a lot of the harm that's been carried out across these different systems. There's the social equity components of the actual market structure. Like you were talking about, Tanya, actually having an incubator program that's the first in the country in terms of having a source for funding on day one, actually prior to day one, to be able to actually provide low and zero interest loans to people who are social equity applicants. And to be clear, the social equity entire sphere within the MRTA also prioritizes people who have been directly impacted. So if folks listening to right now have had an arrest themselves, have had a family member be arrested for cannabis, or are in a community that has had a disproportionate number of arrests, that means you are prioritized within this process. The incubator, this is what we're talking about with implementation, like the majority leader said. It's not enough to just get the bill over the finish line. We need to have it implemented in the right way. So as we're standing on this precipice right now, where the possession part, the criminal legal system aspects have already been enacted. As soon as the governor signed the bill, possession became legal up to 3 ounces, as folks were talking about. Being able to share without compensation became legal. But also, it set in motion this process of now having to establish the Cannabis Control Board, which has 5 seats, and the Office of Cannabis Management, which is a whole new state agency. There's a webpage at this point that I think is like cannabis.ny.com or something like that, or .ny.gov. And that's a placeholder. There's going to be an entire agency that is going to be devoted to regulating, to making sure the information gets out, and actually having purview over the social equity program, the incubator program, the licensing, all these different things. And we need that entity to be brought into effect in the right way, in the same way that the principles and the values of racial and economic justice were part of this entire campaign, were part of the bill, woven into the fabric of the MRTA because of the strong leadership from the sponsors. We now need to see that carried forward into implementation. We need to make sure that the culture in the Office of Cannabis Management is one that really understands the contours all across New York State of how this can play out, of how we can actually reach folks who have been directly impacted, and make sure that there is a bridge for folks to be able to come from the legacy market into the licensed space. All of these things that we've talked about for so long are now becoming concrete, and we need to make sure that it's done with the same values, the same principles that have informed this entire process. So just echoing the majority leader's words here around how absolutely important it is for the implementation process to be able to move forward super intentionally. And we all have to raise our voices and be really clear about that as well. So with that, I think there are a lot of questions that are already coming through. So I'm gonna kick it back for folks to be able to rejoin, and let's see what the questions are. I think we have one initially. Tanya, this one might be for you.
Right.
Touching and non-touching businesses within this entire new industry and economic sector that is being established.
So when we say plant touching, you are literally growing, processing, doing some sort of making it edible or what have you. You have a business that actually touches the plant. Versus non-plant touching, or what we also call ancillary, which is you do something cannabis adjacent, I like to say. Maybe you are, like I said, a cannabis accountant. And I stress it because business people, creative business people need accountants all day, every day. Bookkeepers. If you did something that was not necessarily touching the plant, I do events. So I do non-plant touching education-based events. Women Grow is a community and we do education and we actually, make sure that people understand the business side of starting a cannabis business. That's an ancillary business.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanya. And I know we're getting questions here as well around just what is the legal age for marijuana consumption? Some of the public defenders on the call want to answer that from the legal standpoint.
It's 21.
That's right, 21 and up for consumption, for possession of 3 ounces. And as we're moving into the space where the Office of Cannabis Management will be issuing the regulations for home cultivation, it'll be the same. You'll have to be 21 years and older in order to cultivate your plants at home. But I do just want to emphasize that one of the really important aspects of the bill was recognizing that we cannot continue to use the criminal legal system to come at folks. That has been a weapon that has been wielded at communities for far too long. And that as we're moving forward into this new era, that it would be inappropriate to continue to weaponize the criminal legal system in the same way. So for people who are under 21 who are in possession of 3 ounces, as you were saying before, Jackie, there's a civil penalty that is issued, but is not one, to be very, very clear. The NYPD is not the enforcer of that. In the NYPD's own internal memo after the bill passed, instructing officers about what they can and cannot do and what the new parameters are, the department itself was very clear to officers saying that possession of 3 ounces or less of cannabis was not in any way a justification for an officer to stop, to question, to interact with, to report, or to have any sort of contact with a young person over. And that's really, really important because as we all know, in our communities, it's long been that young people, especially young people of color, were the ones who were ruthlessly targeted for marijuana possession. We're ruthlessly targeted over the odor of marijuana even. So the fact that the odor also has been removed as a justification for any type of stop with pedestrians and can only be used in really, really guardrailed sort of ways in the context of a vehicle is absolutely crucially important and really, really key for folks listening right now to have that information and that knowledge and to know that you cannot be continually harassed by law enforcement just because of these things. And with that, I'm actually going to bring up the third question, which is when it says you cannot smoke in a park or public space, does that mean you cannot smoke a marijuana pen? So concentrated forms of cannabis. Defenders?
Sure. I mean, it does mean that you cannot smoke the pen in the same way that you can't vape, like a vape for tobacco, it's the same. So you wouldn't be able to use that pen in a place where smoking tobacco was prohibited. You would be able to use it in any other public place where smoking is not prohibited, such as I said before, on your stoop or on the street or anything like that. I also, do we want to jump in that same vein to question 4 about food items? Because the distinction between the cannabis and the concentrated cannabis. So the concentrated cannabis deals with what would be the liquid that would be in the vape pen or the gummies or any of the other food items. I think there have been mints, all sorts of things like that. And how that's handled is it's actually you're allowed currently to possess legally 24 grams or less of concentrated cannabis. So that's measured in the grams, if that makes sense or it answers your question.
Awesome. And then the next question is, if a teenager under the age of 21 is caught with marijuana or an edible, what would be the consequence?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on that already, Melissa. I mean, it was very explicit, and I know that the majority leader talked about this in the debate. It's very explicit that the idea is that it's not to be criminalized if you're under 21. It's decriminalized. The idea is that the penalty for somebody who is under 21 and caught with marijuana or concentrated cannabis in the form of some kind of edible, as the question suggests, the consequence would be a civil penalty, which could be like a $50 fine, along with some education about using marijuana. That would be the punishment. And in no way does that authorize NYPD or any other law enforcement agency to stop these young people, to question them, to interrogate them, detain them, none of that.
Melissa, can I jump in just because for immigrants, a lot of times the consequences for any marijuana related activity is going to be a little bit different. And so one thing to make sure that people are remembering if they are not US citizens or if they're talking to other people who are not US citizens is that because we still have this mismatch where New York has legalized marijuana and the federal government has not, something like a stop or a ticket that somebody had when they were under 21 can have an immigration impact. And so people should be thinking about when you're talking to, for example, a CBP agent, when you're coming into the country, or when you're in the middle of an interview with an immigration agent, you should be aware that the use and possession of marijuana for federal purposes may have different consequences. And so if you're an immigrant, you really want to be talking with a trusted, really knowledgeable immigration attorney about how you can navigate that mismatch.
Thank you, Marie, for bringing that up, because yes, there's definitely a difference in terms of what the criminal penalty would be as opposed to what the collateral consequences would be for immigration reasons, for housing, for education, for family court. It's not just about the criminal justice system.
That's exactly right. We know that, unfortunately, cannabis prohibition at the federal level touches into so many different aspects of people's lives. And making sure that we have that information really available for folks so that we know, even though New York and actually many of our neighboring states have moved forward, it doesn't necessarily mean that the federal government has done that necessarily. Just to highlight for folks who are interested in what's happening nationally on this issue, Congress has now seen the reintroduction of the MORE Act in the House, which actually passed through at the very end of the last Congress. It had some troubling and really problematic provisions added to it that were meant to keep people with prior criminal legal contact for cannabis out of the industry, which was not acceptable. And so this new version of the bill that's been reintroduced and hopefully will actually be moving in the House very soon has those provisions removed. So it is really pushing forward more. And we know that on the Senate side, Senate Leader Chuck Schumer from New York has been watching really closely at the MRTA. He's been really immersed in what all of the different facets of our legalization and our marijuana justice effort were back here at home in New York, and is now working with Senator Booker and Senator Wyden to be able to craft the Senate bill, which will really build off of the MORE Act that's been introduced in the House, and then go even further in the areas of restitution, and making sure that there's expungement for folks with prior records. And then again, that community reinvestment component that we were talking about here in New York is also really important at the federal level too. So just a quick plug if folks want to learn more about that. My colleagues at our DC office of Drug Policy Alliance are really working on that at the federal level as well. But we still have to remember in the meantime that there are different layers of consequences that people could potentially face. So thank you again, Marie, for being able to really delineate that clearly for folks who have immigration considerations. And just quickly pivoting now to another question, what can we as the public do to make sure that we have equity in the issuing of licensing? How can folks make sure that there is accountability within that process, and what will it actually look like? Tanya, I don't know if you want to jump in on this one.
I would tell anyone would really at this point, since we don't have any regulation, is to, if you are looking to get into a business, to start doing all the legwork to establishing your business now. I don't have the answer as far as how to be, I don't know what to do as far as to how do we make sure that they do what they're held accountable to do? I know that the legislation is in place, but the regulation has yet to be established. And I would lean to you for that. But I know if I were a business owner right now or wanting to get into the space, I would be working really diligently to get my business established. And if I already had one, to make sure that I'm building my team so that I'm ready to apply for capital funding when the time comes. But as far as like holding people accountable, I mean, I would lean to you for that.
Yeah, I think this is really where the implementation part that the majority leader is talking about becomes abundantly clear. We're in this moment where the governor has two positions where he is allowed to nominate the candidates for those positions. One is the executive director of the Office of Cannabis Management, that whole agency that'll be set up at the state level. And the other is the chairperson of the Cannabis Control Board. That's a 5-person board that will basically have oversight over that agency. So what we're looking at are two of the key leadership roles that will really be tasked with not just rolling out the entire bill itself, but those crucial provisions on social equity. And then there's the position of a chief equity officer within the Office of Cannabis Management that was created that's distinct to New York. I don't believe any other state with legalization has done this, of creating an actual paid position of somebody who is going to be entirely focused on the social equity program and on seeing that it rolls out well and properly according to the statutes that are in the bill. Because we can have all the nice language we want in the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. And if there isn't accountability, if there isn't transparency, and if there isn't an advocacy community actually making sure that they know, as the majority leader said, making sure that they know that they're on watch and that they need to make sure that this is done properly. We have the examples of other states where there's had to be immense pressure well after legalization gets over the finish line in order to have it move properly. So that's a lot of the conversation here in New York, is getting the right people in those roles that are going to be really important in terms of establishing these entire agencies, but then also making sure that there's accountability from the advocacy community as well. With that, I'm going to plug into another question here because we got a lot rolling in. One is around how some towns and municipalities, especially we're hearing a lot about this from Long Island, are saying that they're not going to take part in legalization. They're going to opt out. So this person is asking if they live in Brooklyn and they go to Long Island, what happens? Vice versa for people who are based in anywhere across the state that is trying to opt out at the local level. What does that actually entail? What does that actually mean in terms of the way people can consume or not consume in those places? I don't know if Tanya, you want to lead us off?
I mean, from what I know, the opting out is the opting out of retail. They have the opportunity, and there's some stuff going on in these individual towns and counties, and not an entire county, but these individual towns and villages and what have you, the opportunity to opt out of retail only. So it is my guess, and please, the attorneys here, please chime in. If I'm carrying cannabis, it is still within my legal right to carry my ounce, 2 ounce, up to 3 ounces of cannabis on my person. That doesn't matter if I'm going from Brooklyn to go visit my friend on Long Island, but I won't be able to go to a retail establishment in Long Island to make cannabis purchases. And please clarify me if I'm incorrect.
No, Tanya, you're absolutely correct. The MRTA is a state law. And so across New York State, possession of marijuana in the amounts that it lays it out in the law is legal. So you would be able to have that marijuana with you on this particular, at this particular town on Long Island that had potentially opted out. And it's my understanding, Melissa, that the towns that do opt out also would not receive any of the revenue. Is that correct?
That's right. And so that's a strong incentive for a lot of places that are considering what to do and what not to do, especially considering, like you were saying, that state law preempts local governance in terms of overall, like the criminal penal code provisions around cannabis, very importantly within the MRTA, have been taken away and have been shifted really clearly. And so this is not about saying that it's illegal to consume if a place opts out. It's just as Tanya was saying, that that means that there won't be retail, that there won't be business establishments within that jurisdiction, but then they don't have the tax revenue that's going to come in. And there's a significant amount of revenue that is going to be spurred by the new cannabis economy. Projections for New York State are significant. Right now, we have around a $3 billion legacy market. And so as that transitions over into the legal space, we'll have, taxes that are coming back into the state level, but also local taxes and county taxes that'll be able to be, again, invested back into the communities that have been the hardest hit. And I think that's another opportunity for folks, who are in the boroughs right now. The city is going through its budgeting process. And so this is something where folks can be able to say, just as at the state level, there's restitution and there's community reinvestment, we also want to see that at the city level and bring that into some of the budget conversations, as well as making sure that the city is going to leverage the resources that it has to make sure that it's investing in the social equity components of legalization, making sure that the city resources are going to be made available to people in the form of, could be like shared processing centers, things like that, where cooperatives, where other folks who don't necessarily have deep pockets, where people who are going to be micro business licensees are going to be able to have a shared production or processing space, like we've seen with some communal kitchens with other city-run programs. So it's an exciting time. We can think about what the state has done as sort of the floor, and in some ways make it a challenge between different cities across the state of how much further are you going to be able to go? What else really interesting and innovative are you going to be able to do here? But we won't see that creativity with opting out necessarily. And it also flies in the face of public opinion. We know that 2/3 of New Yorkers, actually more than that at this point, support legalization. A poll that was released actually shortly before the bill passed had respondents who said that they themselves didn't favor legalization, but 1 in 10 of those people said that they would actually go to a legal dispensary after legalization passed. So, we see that there's an opportunity for a lot of education, a lot of making sure that we're working through the long-held stigma that people hold. and just, making sure that we're having a safe and open space where people can ask questions and get real answers and be able to get that information that for so long hasn't necessarily been available or has been really stigmatized. So with that, I also want to bring us into another question that was asking about what are the rules around consumption in private rental units? So we've talked about public housing and some of the issues there because of federal prohibition. But in terms of private rental units, this person is asking if your landlord is opposed, can they evict you for smoking marijuana? What are some of the parameters there? I don't know if folks want to jump in, and then I can follow up as well.
I could just start off. I mean, basically private dwellings or private landlords can really prohibit you, via your lease from doing anything that they don't want you to do. And you can say, okay, well, I'm going to agree to abide by those rules and live in this apartment, or I'm going to look for a different apartment. So there are certain restrictions that private landlords can put on you. And I'll leave it to Melissa to talk more about the fine points because I'm definitely not the civil attorney, but I do think that you can be restricted in some respects from using marijuana if that's something that your landlord in a private residential unit puts into your lease.
Yeah, I think there are general protections around housing, assuming that the landlord is not in a case where they would lose a federal benefit. But outside of that, there does have to be a specific policy around smoking if they're going to try to enforce it. And that has to be something that has been part of the lease that the tenant has agreed to. Some landlords have kind of a general no smoking policy, in which case smokable forms of cannabis would fall under that. But we know that that's not the case for a lot of landlords. And so if somebody is in a situation where there is not a specific policy, then you do have protections within the bill. And that's really, really important. Let's see, we have another question here about if you have a child that has been assigned, for instance, a PINS petition, what happens if marijuana is included in the issues? Will that be held against the child or against the family member? And Nila, I don't know if you want to at least talk about just kind of the broader protections around parents, and we can follow up around this specific answer for this person.
Yeah, I would be happy to get back to folks about the specific answer to this question. But what I'll say generally is if you have ACS in New York City coming to your door and knocking on your door, first and foremost, you should know that you have rights. You don't have to answer the door. You don't have to answer their questions. You don't have to let them in your home unless they can show you some sort of court order to that effect. If you're experiencing that, I please encourage you to reach out to our office, Brooklyn Defender Services. We have attorneys and social workers who can work with you, even if there's no court case and even if there aren't any court orders. But that said, if you're in a situation where your marijuana use as a parent is being scrutinized by ACS, remember also that they would have to have a court order to ask you to take a drug test. That's something that happens all the time is when ACS is called to someone's home, they ask immediately for a drug test, for you to take a urine drug test, even if your marijuana use hasn't come up or any other substance hasn't come up. Sometimes that's part of their kind of checklist of very invasive questions that they'll ask. And again, that's not something that you have to consent to. And again, I would absolutely encourage you to reach out to an attorney. All that said, if it's out on the table, a parent's marijuana use or maybe even your child's, the law that I mentioned makes very clear that unless ACS can come to a court and show evidence that your marijuana use as a parent has very much harmed your child or has put your child at imminent risk of harm, that marijuana use in and of itself can't be used to hold you negligent, can't be used to separate your child from you, can't be used to keep your child separated from you. But as always, if you're in that situation, please reach out to us. Across the city, there are advocates who are there to intervene and help you.
Thank you so much for that, Nila. And I want to just emphasize this so much because within the conversation around family separations, that we saw in different contexts, around children who are being separated from their parents at the border, around other separations that were happening there was also a renewed conversation about how cannabis was being used as a justification to separate predominantly Black and Latinx parents from their, in many cases, newborn children in New York. There's some really deep reporting that has been done on this that I would encourage folks to go look up after this. And also just really understand the deep connections across so many different parts of people's lives. The fact that we have the non-consensual tests that Nila was talking about that can be administered without even telling the parent when they're giving birth at the hospital that this test is going to be done on them, and then the results of that test, without any sort of demonstration of harm to the child, can be used to rip a newborn from their mother's arms, from their parents' arms, and put them into not even care within a kin member, but just care, like completely tossing them into the family regulation system, and sometimes taking 10 months, a year, for that parent to be able to get the child back in their custody when there's been no demonstration of harm whatsoever, is something that is just so fundamentally unacceptable. That, you know, I'm glad that this bill takes some steps in that direction, but there's a lot more that's needed in terms of making sure that that testing can't happen, and that families can't be torn apart that way. For other substances too, we know that it's not a response that is family-centered. We know it's a response that in fact is not child-centered. So being able to have a much broader conversation, which we'll have to do on another panel, because I know we're running up on time here. But I just want to bring in the final question here is about what a DUI for marijuana would look like under this new law, or in what circumstances would the police be able to stop somebody, and what the parameters are around any sort of searches or conversations that they can even have with somebody. So Jackie, I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, I had a feeling we were going to get one of these DWI questions. Happy to answer it. And I think the MRTA was very intentional and very specific about the language around car searches. So just to start with, driving under the influence of marijuana to the extent that it impairs your driving was already illegal. The MRTA didn't change any of that. And it's still illegal, and it is still a misdemeanor. Which is the same level of offense that driving under the influence of alcohol to the extent that it impairs your driving is. It's a misdemeanor. So that's what the penalty would look like in terms of driving under the influence of marijuana. So that's not different with the MRTA. What is different is what the police can use or do in terms of stopping your vehicle for that purpose and then searching your vehicle after that's the articulated reason that they stopped you. So in order for a police officer to stop you, if they're having, you know, they most likely would not have suspicion that you were impaired because you were using marijuana. They may think that you're impaired because of the way that you're driving, for example. So that might be a reason that they would stop you. You ran a stop sign, you were not, you know, keeping your lane, you were driving too fast. Those are sort of traffic infractions that a police officer might use to stop your car. And then what they could potentially do is they could investigate a driving under the influence offense for marijuana if they had a specific reason to do so. And right now, after the MRTA passed, that would be really only be odor of burnt marijuana. Because you are allowed to possess marijuana, and you are allowed to possess marijuana in your car, only the odor of burnt marijuana could be used to further an investigation for driving under the influence of marijuana. The police at that point, if they were going to conduct any search whatsoever of your car, they could only search areas that were immediately accessible to the driver, that they would be looking for something for that investigation only. So they're not allowed to search the car and say that they were looking for evidence of a firearm, or search the car and say that they were looking for, you know, evidence of a watch that had been stolen in that area. They're not allowed to do that. They're only allowed to look for evidence that would be relevant in connection to that stop or their investigation for, their hunch that you're driving under the influence of marijuana. And what's really important about that is that because it's specific about areas accessible to the driver, that means it doesn't apply to the police being able to search areas that are not immediately accessible to the driver, like backpacks, any closed containers, any purses that are the passengers, anything that's in the trunk. And those are really big distinctions, and they're really important when we're dealing with, defending individuals who are being charged with these types of offenses, because it's a very important distinction that is very specific in the MRTA.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And I think that's really crucial to note, just again for folks, that just because there's a stop where an officer is alleging that because of somebody's driving conduct, that there is a belief that they're driving under the influence of cannabis, that does not mean that they then get to toss the car in all of these different ways. That used to be the case. There are now really specific protections and guardrails around what can be involved within that interaction. Again, like we've talked about over the many, many years of this campaign, simply removing aspects of cannabis enforcement from law enforcement officers does not end racism in policing. That is a much broader movement within New York State, within our country, across the globe, that continues to be a challenge. But for the meantime, we're removing tools that have been used for way too long to be able to criminalize people. So with that, I know that we're coming right up on our time together. I don't know if the Assembly member is around and is going to rejoin us as we're wrapping up here. There you are. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman. It's fantastic to see you. And thank you again for hosting this forum, this conversation. The questions that came in from your constituents were fantastic. And I know that we'll continue to discuss a lot of these things well into the future.
Well, the interesting part, as I was just saying to Nadine, I have my own question. Because if I get, this question once, I think I've gotten it a million times, and I'm sure you have too. So everyone is seeing, cannabis in New York is legal, folk can get involved in it. But everyone is asking, how do you, what do I have to do? What do I do? And it's almost like, people want to be sort of handheld through this process. And you do a consumption location, you do a retail location, and here are the licenses for them all, right? And it's like, that's not how this is going to work. And so how do we sort of help people in terms of figuring this thing out? Like, one of the things that I say is, well, you can maybe go online and get a hemp license, because sometimes if you're already in the license world, it may be easier to get a license in something else. And then the next question is, but are the hemp licenses those $250,000 licenses? And I was like, wait, what $250,000 license? And so if someone could, just help me figure out, how do I answer that question for folk when people tell me, how do I get into this business? And of course, most people are thinking they want to be, the McDonald's of cannabis. So please help me.
Sure, I can jump in, and then Tanya, if you want to come in too. I think you have a tremendous amount of expertise on this, and I know you get asked this question a lot as well with Women Grow. I'll say, just as you were speaking about, Assemblymember, of the different types of cannabis that are going to be covered now under the MRTA moving forward, it's not just adult use, what people call recreational, but very much to your point, it's also the medical marijuana program in New York State, and also the industrial hemp CBD farming program in New York State that's been operational for a few years now. And so those licenses with the huge price tag that people are talking about and referring to, that's a reference to the old structure of the medical marijuana program in New York State, where the cost was exorbitant. There were only 5 licenses issued in the first place. It was later expanded with 5 more. It's still been an incredibly unfortunately, a tightly controlled program that has not met the needs of patients across New York State. The costs have been astronomical. The geographic access has been really difficult for patients. The forms of cannabis that could even be included, whole flower is not included. That's the most common form of cannabis that people think about. It's just bud. So not having that available has driven up the cost for patients a lot. And those huge price tags on the licenses made it such that most New Yorkers couldn't even put their name in the running could not even begin to think about if they could participate. The hemp licensing was a little bit better. It was actually quite open and broad because they were really trying to get a lot of upstate farmers, a lot of folks into this new space. But then there have been a lot of issues as well with the regulation and people being able to actually use their product and process their product. So that's also been hard, where people, who don't have a whole lot of capital haven't been able to move. And so what are we looking at for adult use, right? Like, this is the crucial where the rubber hits the road type of moment. And the MRTA was really clear about making sure that this program, especially the social equity program, but licenses in general, would be accessible to New Yorkers. And so to my mind, that really means very specifically not having exorbitant license fees on it and being responsive to the types of actual resources that people will have. But then that's also the incubator program, having those low and zero interest loans. That's also the rest of the incubator program, which is legal counseling, technical assistance, making sure that folks actually have the information they need as they're filling out the license application, so that they're not going to be just derailed because they didn't fill out the form properly. And that's part of the chief equity officer role. That's part of the Office of Cannabis Management duty, really. And that's a huge reason why we're saying that the leaders of that entity, as well as the board, need to really have a deep understanding around racial and economic justice, because of exactly that point, because we need to make sure that people who have been the most impacted under New York's cannabis prohibition can actually participate as we're moving forward. And Tanya, I'm going to kick it to you because I know that you have this conversation with folks really regularly. Oh, you're on mute, Tanya.
Everyone wants to open up a dispensary. Everyone wants to open up a consumption lounge. We don't know what these regulations are going to look like and what these licensing fees are going to look like. But bottom line, plant touching businesses, you need a significant amount of capital, because you have to run the business, and no businesses normally are, especially when you're a physical brick and mortar business, these are not inexpensive endeavors. So if someone truly wants to, they need to start building their acumen for capital. They're going to need capital. Now, again, as Melissa said, the state is going to have initiatives in place to have to get people running, but it's not going to be, I'm just going to get a store and throw some cannabis in it and open my doors. That is not exactly how this is going to work. I have a really great friend of mine who uses this analogy. During the gold rush, it wasn't the people who found the gold that made the money. It was the people that sold the picks and the shovels. There is a lot to be said with ancillary businesses. I know I don't want to beat a dead horse, but there is so much to be said with non-plant touching entities. But if you are really looking forward to start following the Office of Cannabis, the website is up. We know that much at least. And sign up for alerts so that when these things when these regulations start to come out, we need to really have a fine-tooth comb these regulations to make sure that you are ready to go. If you can apply, if you currently have a business, I would apply for an MWBE certification right away. If you've been established for over a year, you can do that now. I would really start talking to people about building a team. This will not be a one-person show, but it could be. Like, I run an event company, and it is me and two other folks. And we really are able to do stuff, but we're not a plant touching business. My whole business model would change if I were a plant touching entity. So just gear up, start having great conversations. There is no time now, unless you're talking to an attorney, you should not be spending any money other than building your business. And from my perspective, just working with a good attorney so that you are positioning yourself to be ready when the regulations come.
Well, I think that's a awesome sort of segue to another sort of conversation I know I've been having. So I want to, before even going to that, I also had a conversation with folk who might be interested in doing, like, they have a trucking company. And they're like, well, how can my trucking company? And I'm like, well, I think that's perfect. Right. And so as you mentioned, Tanya, to make sure that whatever it is that you're interested in and are good at, then do that. Right. Like, not everybody needs to be in retail. But I think that's just a picture that makes it so much easier. But for legal services, I know that, so we were having some conversations about legal services funding and providing resources, because since I get so many questions from folk about how to start my business and what do I have to do, so I'm like, okay, so we should create some type of a pipeline within a legal services group or however, to be able to provide those types of that type of support. Because there's already, I know, let's say for instance, in Legal Services Corp A, there's an entity that exists that helps with business development. I know the like Lawyers Alliance will help you set up a nonprofit and also work with you. Like, what are your thoughts are even just on like advocating for a legal services component to be able to do this, when most of their funding, though, I think is through the federal government. So I know we have some folk from defender services, but not necessarily from legal services. But just was wondering, like, what your thoughts are on that, like trying to now, you know, put the lawyers together and the accountants together, right? And everyone else who was about a part of the body politic, that a lot of, and that's where a lot of businesses sort of fall through the cracks.
I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities to create a legal services program that can help people. But the key thing is that those attorneys have to be well versed in cannabis. And it's not really the thing that you could just be like, oh, I'm an attorney. Well, now I'm just going to put cannabis in front of it. Now I'm a cannabis attorney. There's a lot that needs to be, you need to vet those attorneys to make sure that they understand cannabis law and are able to, once we get these regulations, be able to navigate your business and you through that process.
Yeah, I think one other option that's really important to highlight here is the cooperatives license, and the sort of supports that exist for cooperatives in New York. We actually have some of the most robust infrastructure in anywhere in the country around worker-owned cooperatives right now. And there's a higher participation among women of color, and immigrants in particular in New York's cooperatives. So I really want to encourage folks to understand what a worker-owned cooperative is. It means, folks that I think had different sorts of experiences, maybe like shopping at a cooperative, which is owned by the members, and you get a certain portion back. Worker cooperative means that the workers themselves, everybody who's employed at that place, actually owns a share of the business and has a stake in the business's success, and is also able to get residuals. Like when the business is actually profiting, is moving well, all of the workers enjoy that as well. And so Green Worker Cooperatives is just one organization that I want to shout out. They've actually incubated a number of CBD businesses already that are worker-owned cooperatives. They can help give folks the information they need about how do you even start a cooperative, where do you get off the ground? But that really is a way to pool together resources, like Tanya's saying, and not have to have all of the capital yourself. Yes. But be able to work with people to be able to establish a cooperative. And there's a specific license designated within the MRTA for cooperatives, which is a first in the country. And this is something where law school clinics can also be really helpful. CUNY Law has a clinic that in particular has been helpful for folks who've been working on establishing cooperatives. So I just bring that to the fore to say, this is a sector that is like a newly created industry in terms of the license regulated space. We know that it's a legacy industry that's been operating for many, many years. We want to be able to make sure that there are opportunities for folks to bridge over. And that doesn't necessarily have to look like all of the rest of the ways that our economy runs right now. There is also a new opportunity to be able to do things like co-ops, to be able to have micro businesses, to be able to function in a way that's more responsive to the resources and to the ingenuity and to the expertise that people already have in this space, and to make sure we're not blocking people out.
Absolutely.
Well, I will also say that one great bit of advice is, to follow all these amazing women on social media, because quite frankly, every time I turn around, there's all these different events and there's all these different informationals, and in each one of them that I attend, I feel like I pick up a little bit more information that I didn't have in the past. So I believe everyone has already put their social media handles out. Mine, of course, is the real Latrice Walker. But if you haven't, please let folk know how to find you on social media.
I guess I'll start. First place is Women Grow, at Women Grow on all social platforms. For the Canadiva, it's at the Canadiva on all social platforms. And I am Groovy, OOVIE 725 if you want to find me personally.
Awesome. I can go next in our virtual circle here. Follow Drug Policy Alliance on Twitter and on all the platforms. Our New York office is at DPA_NY. You can also follow the Start Smart Coalition, which is the campaign of folks that got the MRTA over the finish line, at Start Smart NY. And then national DPA, since we don't only operate in New York State, where we're trying to move the dial forward on this issue all across the country. It's at drugpolicy.org. And I'll kick it over to you, Marie.
Thanks. Yeah, so you can get to us at the Immigrant Defense Project at IMDefense. That's IMM Defense on all platforms. And you can also get to us on the internet. We have a ton of resources available, both about the considerations for immigrants around marijuana and other criminal interactions. That's at www.imdefense.org. And I'll hand it over to Neela.
Yeah, so you can find Brooklyn Defender Services at BKLYN Defender, both on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on Facebook. And just like Marie mentioned, we have a really informative website, bds.org, that has contact information to access all of our legal departments, not just our criminal and family defense practices, our immigration defense practices, our housing attorneys, benefits attorneys. We are here, especially if you are an assembly member, Walker's district. We're here to represent Brooklyn and be of your assistance.
Okay, got it. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
I was just going to say that all of that contact information that Neela gave applies to me as well.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, well, you've heard from our experts. And again, this has been an amazing and informative session. And I think we should continue, of course, in this dialogue, because as all of the regulations, sort of begin to develop, I think every piece of information, the folk are watching from all over the country. And I'm also getting phone calls from California and every place else to try to sort of get a piece of this, a slice of this pie. And our esteemed leader made sure to make sure that New York State and the residents of New York State have priority here. And so the thing that I keep saying is, well, you got to find a New Yorker to partner up with. But we also, as you mentioned, Melissa, have a huge issue with respect to the folk in NYCHA. I know they're opening up all these community gardens, and there's a really great one here in my neighborhood in Howard Houses. And I remember we were having a conversation the other day, and I was like, well, they're growing all this other stuff. Like, what about the opportunity to grow some cannabis as well? And that opens up a whole other dynamic. But quite frankly, I think it's really going to be incumbent on us to recognize that we have over 400,000 registered NYCHA tenants. And how do we just close out an entire opportunity to, over 500,000 people? Because if we have 400,000 on record, I can only imagine how many people are sliding through the cracks. And so we have to make sure that we are also opening up this opportunity for those folk there. So we have to definitely, go down to Washington and, speak to our congressional leaders to make sure that the equitable piece also includes the people who live in our New York City Housing Authority and, quite frankly, public housing authorities all across the country. And so again, thank you, thank you to everyone who participated in this amazing platform. And I look forward to catching up with everyone tomorrow, same time, same place, as we continue along in our conversation with respect to Juneteenth. The This is the 12th annual Juneteenth week that we're doing, of course, with my sister with Juneteenth New York, Athenia Rodney. And tomorrow at 7 p.m., we will have from 1865 until now. How do we reform the criminal justice system? So basically, this is a continuation of what we've already started here. And so I look forward to the dialogue. So thank you again, and good night, everyone.